All right, our third category of disorders is a short one. It's one called dissociative disorders. This is an interesting category. You're going to have heard of one of these at least, and it probably includes in the last one the most controversial of these disorders that we're going to take a look at. I like to call these soap opera disorders because I think a lot of times in shows like that, if they run out of ideas for what characters are supposed to be doing, a lot of times they'll give the character amnesia or uh, dissociative identity disorder uh, to kind of spice up the drama a little bit. This is one that you see in a lot of different places. The movie Switch, if you've seen that one, is one that kind of deals with this. We'll talk about that as we go through. But they're interesting. The dissociative part is going to come in because what happens is one part of who the person is. It could be a memory, could be personality, things like that are separated from the rest of the person. There are a couple of big symptoms. Usually there is memory loss that's going to accompany a dissociative disorder. That's kind of the big symptom that you'll see. This is one where you'll see a lot of times what's called comorbidity. Comorbidity is the idea that people can have more than one disorder at the same time. When people are dealing with memory loss and some of the things that are there, a lot of times that can lead to anxiety. We already talked about anxiety disorders or things like depression that'll be coming up next when we talk about mood disorders. And that's really kind of a possibility with any of these disorders that we're going to be looking at. That if you have one, you've got something that is comorbid with that. The problem with dissociative disorders is because memory is gone, then uh, it is hard for these people to figure out who they are. Our memories are an important part of our stories, our personalities, and so without those memories, there can be what is called a blurred sense of identity. These people really don't know who they are, and it can lead them to question what is real and what's not. I've got the term there for you, derealization, and it's basically this idea that uh, you don't know what's truth and what's fiction. There are three types of these we're going to look at. The first is amnesia. Then we're going to look at a special type of amnesia called fugue, and then finally something called dissociative identity disorder. So there are just three in this category. Amnesia is the loss of personal memory. It could be caused by any kind of trauma, physical trauma. So you take a bump on the head, you're in a car accident, things like that. Very famously, I know several of you have said that you've seen this show, Full House. In the very last episode of Full House, Michelle is thrown off a horse and loses her memory, and so the family is trying to tell her all these stories um, to get her memory back, which is a really effective treatment for that. But uh, as she's going through that, it's a good chance for the show to do a retrospective too. So you lose personal memory with this. You still know how to do certain things. You're not going to forget how to throw a ball. You're not going to forget how to drive a car. Certain things, because if you remember when we talked about memory stuff earlier, those things are stored in different parts of the brain. So you keep your basic skills. It's your personal memory that's going to be gone. So we're talking more in that parietal lobe area of the brain. There's no pill that you can take for this. Kind of the treatment is introducing these people to very familiar things. So trying to figure out, showing them scrapbooks or videos, things like that. Now there can be a lot of frustration uh, with seeing those things and not remembering it. So that could cause some of that anxiety that we saw there a couple of slides ago. But showing them these things, just kind of think of it like if your memory is a river. Somebody's put a dam up. you've got to find some way to crack that dam to get the information flowing again. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find the piece of information that's going to be the crack that kind of opens that person up again. And so with amnesia, there are a couple of different types. We discussed those when we did memory, but you remember retrograde amnesia is forgetting what happened before. Anterograde amnesia is the inability to form new memories. There are several different types, and you can refer back to your notes from the memory unit that we did earlier if you're interested in specifics. Second type is what's called dissociative fugue. Um, this is amnesia, but with wandering, and so these people will get amnesia, but um, they in for whatever reason in a panic or uh, in anxiety over what's happened to them, they'll leave their environment, which of course can make it hard for them to be around familiar things and to get effectively treated. But these folks just kind of run, and so you'll see with fugue people um, that are in very different environments. If the memory does come back, a lot of times they're freaked out because they don't know where they're at. They don't remember how they got there. And so that can be pretty disconcerting. If the memory doesn't come back, then really you've taken yourself um, out of an environment where you've got those things that um, could kind of stimulate those memories coming back again. And so fugue is a pretty specific type. It's very rare, but another type of dissociative disorder. The last one's the most controversial, and it's um, one called dissociative identity disorder, or DID. It used to be called multiple personalities. And this is one, I've got a video link there for you on the playlist where there are people that swear up and down that this is 100% true, that this really happens, and then there are people that fight you to the death on the other way, that this is kind of a complete fiction. Basically, the idea of dissociative identity disorder is that a person will have a traumatic events that split part of their personality off into different people. Now, part of the problem is that this is one that's been seized on by movies and television shows, and usually they sensationalize it a little bit. If you remember the movie from a couple of years ago, Split, with James McAvoy, where he is playing a character that's got multiple personalities. Um, and ultimately ends up having this one personality that's got superhuman strength, and I think there was even kind of a third movie uh, of the Unbreakable trilogy, Glass, that saw a little bit further with that character. Um, Usually, dissociative identity disorder isn't quite that sensationalized. We've got a picture there for you, a guy named Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker is a Heisman Trophy winning football player who went public with his diagnosis with DID several years ago, wrote a book, gave some interviews. I'll link one of the interviews there for you on the playlist as well, talking about these multiple personalities he has. Now, the interesting thing is when one of the personalities is in control, the main person uh, blacks out. They don't have memories of what's going on while what they call their alters are in control. And so Herschel Walker, you'll see him say in the interview, doesn't remember the Heisman Trophy ceremony. So one of these events that's huge in the life of an athlete, and he says he has no recollection of it, that it was another personality that did that. Sometimes people with dissociative identity disorder can have switched genders with alternate personalities, and every one of those alternate personalities will have distinct characteristics, different different mannerisms, speech patterns, ways of dress, things like that. Like I said, take a look at the videos I'm going to put on the playlist for this one. Uh, and I've got one from CBS this morning that does a really neat job of kind of outlining um, the split in the psychological community about it. The interesting thing is it all starts with a TV movie from the 70s. You'll see a clip of, and one of the things I'm going to put up there, called Sybil. That was a really famous one, and you'll see how the controversy kind of started with her. But those are our dissociative disorders. Like I said, for the most part, the treatment here, there's not going to be any kind of medicinal treatment. It is an introduction to familiar things. It's a exposing that person to reality, helping them work through some of the issues that might be happening surrounding the idea of what's real and what's not. Would be the best way to help that patient.